Andrew, maybe you can show some examples from the Met, from Cleveland, from Smithsonian, whatever you feel like, and then we
Yeah.
can move on to the second part.
Yeah, if you can turn on my screen share there, I'll go through some of the slides that I have that are the best demonstration of what we're doing. Oh, perfect. Yep, it's great to see the slide and me, so you can kind of move your eyeballs back and forth so you're not too bored with me or the slides. So this is a culmination of a lot of what we've done for the last 2 years with the Met Museum. This is a really nice distillation of a lot of those things. So if you're not familiar with the Met Museum, it is, as I said, one of the foremost encyclopedic art collections spanning 5,000 years of culture from around the globe. And in 2017, there was an open access policy launched where over 375,000 images were released under a CC0 license. So this is one of the bigger dedications of content under a free license that you'll find in the cultural and heritage world. And this was specifically after many years of working with them, and then finally getting a kind of a blanket policy to do this. So this is an example of that announcement and a 1 year anniversary. We actually have, if you look in the lower right there, that is the Wikimedia Foundation executive director there, having this conversation with the chief digital officer, and the Wikimedia community worked very closely with the Met on this whole idea. And one of the recommendations back then when they first had the release of the content was, wouldn't it be great to have someone working full-time or close to full-time, in the organization, not just kind of a guest, but someone working intimately with the Met as a Wikimedia strategist of some sort to foster a more close linkage between the Met's collection and what's going on in the Wikimedia world. And that's when they brought me on, and I'm very privileged to be in that position because I was one of the folks who helped, get the Met to come out and do this, and then to finally say, we want you to work with us for the year plus. And I was like, this is great. I'd love to do that. So how do we frame this? So this is a really interesting thing. I'm assuming that most of you are fairly familiar with Wikidata and Commons, but how do we explain this to what I would call the C-level folks, like the folks who are absolutely controlling the finances and are the highest paid people at the museum, but they don't really know how to talk about, semantic databases and metadata and all this stuff. So how do we explain it to the highest level folks? And this is how I like to just explain it. Almost everyone's familiar with Wikipedia articles, right? There's 50 million pages in over 200 languages. This is an older slide. We now have more than 6 million articles, but in English language, there's 6 million articles. Britannica had a tenth of that. So we are 10 times bigger than the previous winner or the dominant encyclopedia. Highly notable topics. You see Wikipedia all the time in Google searches. Wikipedia uses images from Wikimedia Commons, right? There's 50 million pages across all these languages, but there's 56 going on, I think more than 60 million media files now in Wikimedia Commons. There's a wide scope of stuff, but so only a fraction of what we see in Wikimedia Commons as media files, images, audio, video, ever get used in Wikipedia. So you could contribute the museum's collection to Wikimedia Commons, but it's a big pile of stuff. So if anyone's ever tried to search Wikimedia Commons for what you want, it's actually pretty frustrating. It's a big pile of stuff. It's like a big pile of photographs in your attic, and you're not exactly sure how to find it, but if you stumble across it, it's quite useful. And the way I like to say is that we have this problem in that if you have a very notable artwork for the Met or Smithsonian, you might have a Wikipedia article, but there's a very high notability bar for Wikipedia. Also, we have language editions across these different Wikipedias, right? So the Hebrew article about an artwork might read very differently than in English or the German or the French or the Spanish. And it really depends on the quality of the volunteers and who comes along to write them. So that can be a big problem, that they're not consistent, and it might be a better one in Hebrew than in English, et cetera, et cetera. How can we store things in a way that transcends this language or linguistic problem, right? Can we store things in a database rather than, written words in each language, right? So sometimes we call this in English, how do we store things and not strings of text? And then how do we store this factual data in a way that is across languages and cultures that we can access all the time? And that's basically what Wikidata does. So this is kind of our argument for where does Wikidata fit into the stack? And Wikidata, I think, straddles this world of, not super highly notable, but it's organized in a way that is an item or something that we're interested in, right? So it is a structured database of all notable figures and works, at least for the art world that we're talking about here. It is language independent, and it supports comprehensive linkages to collections. So one of the most important things about Wikidata is it's a database with pointers to here's what the object is in the Met database. Here's what the object is in the Library of Congress. Here's what the object is in the Louvre or the British Museum or anything. So you can actually have one entry in Wikidata that points to many different organizations. So this is what is commonly called linked open data in the art world, or sometimes they call it LODLAM or LODLAM, linked open data for libraries, archives, museums. And this is really the power of linking together collections in a way that museums have really never done before. So I don't know if Shani's talked about this in the class before, but one of the weird things that I've had to learn over the years is that librarians start off by default with a very generous mentality, right? Like they basically say, when I catalog something, how do I make sure it's discoverable by how do I determine that's discoverable by anyone else in the world? Like, how do I do it in a consistent way that links into other national libraries, that links into other municipal libraries, links into other local libraries? And museums don't have that mentality. Museums are like, how do I serve what I want right now to put on display in that glass case in my museum? And I don't really care if it's findable by someone at the Louvre or the Smithsonian or someone else, right? So that's kind of a very different mentality. So that's why Wikidata, as this kind of one database that links things together, has been really exciting for museums, because they have had to rethink a little bit what they do, but they see the power, saying, you know what, suddenly, I've been obsessed with my collection at my museum, but if I link it into Wikidata, now I can discover all these connections and all these relationships I never knew before. And I'll show you an example in a second about how this works. Any questions so far, Shani? Okay, well, if there's no questions. So as I mentioned, the LODLAM ecosystem, or linked open data for libraries, archives, museums, has been excited about Wikidata, which is also one of the reasons why these organizations, where we've tried to engage them with Wikipedia editing before, believe it or not, a lot of museums and libraries were like, I don't write articles. That's not what I do every day. But when we walked up to them with Wikidata and say, Wikidata has information about whether it's a book or a painting or a statue, and we have pointers to databases, and it has information about its dimensions and who the artist is and when it was created, they get super excited. So librarians and museums love Wikidata. They love commons in terms of the images and everything. So the funny thing is, when you come up with Wikipedia, they go, well, that's nice, but we don't write articles for a living. We deal with cataloging data and everything. That's exactly what Wikidata is meant for. So the challenges are conveying the role and impact of GLAM contributions to Wikidata to curators and institutional leadership. So the curators, it's been much easier. When we say, we want your metadata that you're maintaining in your own database to be in Wikidata, and that makes the entire cultural and heritage database much richer, because we can now see relationships we never saw before. So how to communicate this up to the leadership of museums is a challenge, right? So I like to start with storytelling and not technical explanation. So how do you see this linked data? So if you have the capacity to do this, I would encourage you to try this. So this is a great example of showing the impact of Wikidata in a way that is visible. So if you are on a mobile phone, especially an iPhone, if you scan that QR code on the screen there, you should see, and I'm going to show you this weird, you should see a live Wikidata view like that. Look at that. I can actually move it around like that. I can hopefully drag a node around and move it on the screen. This is a live view of Wikidata right there. That is a Wikidata query, and you might have seen this before, using the Wikidata query engine and showing you relationships from paintings to artists to where they're located now in terms of which museum they are. And this is pretty cool because it actually shows that this painting, which is one of the most famous paintings that the Met has, called the Portrait of Madame X, she was kind of like the model back then was Virginie Gautreau. She was kind of a big socialite in Paris at the time, and she was the subject of many paintings in Paris. And what's interesting about it is she was painted by many different artists, and those paintings are in different museums today. And she had such an impact from this one, kind of special role in Paris, that she was a subject of books. She was a subject of paintings. And that painting was so iconic, it actually was the inspiration for the dress that famous actress Rita Hayworth wore in the movie Gilda. And you can see that Wikidata has all these connections in it, because Wikidata is not just an art database. It is not just a film database. It is not just a biographical database. It is the sum of all databases. So in fact, with one query, you can actually show the relationships between or among these paintings, the films, the actresses, the fashion of the time. So it's also a fashion database on top of that. And this is fascinating because when we showed this graph that says, oh, that painting you had in the Met, that was actually the inspiration for this dress, which we already had this entry in Wikidata for the dress. And that dress was associated with Rita Hayworth, and Rita Hayworth was associated with Gilda. The curators at the Met said, oh, we didn't know that. And these are the people who were experts on this painting. And they did not even know that that painting that they owned was the inspiration for the dress worn by this famous actress in a very famous film. So this really shows you how all these connections, once you have them in Wikidata, gives you insights and tells stories in a way that is very hard to do in just pure text. And two, you could not even discover this unless you're looking for it. But we can, because they're modeled in Wikidata in a way that lends to discovery, right? Does that make sense, Johnny?
Yes, it does. It certainly does.
Great. So that is just an example of what we show all the time. And this is one of those aha moments for folks who don't know anything about metadata and don't know about linked open data and don't know about Wikidata's internals. But this visualization, where we tell people, go on your mobile phone and just scan that code and start playing with it. And they say, I get it now. This Wikidata and linked open data is not an abstract concept. It's something I can touch. It's something I can drag around on the screen. It's something I understand now. And I think this is where at least our roles as Wikimedia experts needs to be in this domain of storytelling and not just describing the technical ways that things work. We need to find ways to tell compelling narratives around the effect of linked open data. And I think this is one of the more powerful examples that we've showed that people just click and get it. And we've shown this to museum folks, to, chief operating officers, chief executive officers around the museum world. And they suddenly say, yeah, that's where the benefit comes from contributing our metadata in a free way. We suddenly start to build all these connections that we didn't know about before. Right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's, yeah. So challenge, mapping Met's objects and metadata to Wikidata. So this is just a very complex graph that I don't expect anyone to digest, but it is a workflow that we've tried to define for any kind of GLAM, any type of cultural institution, saying that if you want to contribute your content, there's kind of a 6-step process along the way. We have tools and methods to get you across each of these boundaries, right? It is sometimes very hard to figure out what to contribute or how to contribute content from your organization to Wikipedia or Wikidata. So we say that you need to prepare and tidy your source data and images. So a lot of this is basically, do you have the right rights defined? Are your images in the right format, right? Are they JPEG format? Are they TIFF format? What does your metadata look like, right? And then number 2 is, what do you have that we already have in Wikidata or Wikipedia? That's what we call the reconciliation process, like step 2. The third one is, now let's do the ingestion, hopefully a smart ingestion, not replicating content, but to intelligently fill in what Wikipedia and Wikidata do not have, or commons. And then you analyze afterwards, what are the effects of contributing that content into the wiki ecosystem, and then find interesting ways to reuse that content, right? So I'd say that the visual graph that you just saw, the knowledge graph, is an example of reusing that in a way that shows insights. And then how do you report and measure? So a lot of these organizations are very interested in, okay, so I spent a lot of labor and money on the first 5 steps. Was it worth it? Like, what's the impact of that? So we actually have tools like Glamorgan and Baglama to do those kinds of things. And I'll show you what our dashboard looks like in a second in terms of how those are reported. So just very quickly, we don't have to get into the details on it. This is what a ideal Met object looks like. It is hopefully something that has, fully descriptive labels and aliases. It has statements. It has external identifiers. So these are the links to other organizations, to other databases out there on the net. And then we also have site links to Wikimedia content. So these are links to Wikipedia articles, to other kinds of functions in the Wikipedia world. Right? So the ideal item has hopefully a very full label, description, and alias. We hopefully have things like, when was the artwork created? When was the, who is the creator? Where's the image? What are the dimensions? Right? But if you are trying to get people to help contribute to this, so a lot of what I'm doing is a mass import of content, but we also invite folks from the community to help fill in content. We actually have two different tools to do this. One is called Recoin, that shows the relative completeness of content in Wikidata. So if you haven't enabled this, I like this a lot. This shows you that when you're looking at a Wikidata item, it can look at all the other items of that same type and say, you know what, you probably should have this field in this Wikidata item. It can give you advice on what to do. We also have a tool called Cradle, which is kind of a forms-based way of creating content in Wikidata, where you fill in forms and it gives you advice on what kinds of things are ideal for a Wikidata item. And then obviously for all Met items, we also put in a Met object ID. This is a unique identifier for the Met Museum that helps us correlate what is in Wikidata and what is from the Met. And then we also have some special ways of designating whether items in Wikidata are part of a collection at the Met Museum. So this is quite useful to have as well. We have what we call kind of like the most significant objects in the Met, about 1,500 to 2,000 items. And then we also have a timeline of art history, which is about 8,000 items that are significant. So it's kind of nice. We have kind of two tiers of content, the very, very notable and the very notable. And it gives us a very easy way to figure out what starting sets of content we want to upload to Wikidata. So I'll skip some of the more particular parts of here. I don't know how much you're getting into the details of Sparkle or advanced searches, but I'm happy to have you go through these to show what ways we can query Wikidata to bring back content that is uniquely the Met's. All right, so in summary, representing the Met is a little bit tough because we have content that is sometimes replicated by other museums. So if you have a print by Albrecht Dürer or a Japanese artist, sometimes there are 5 or 6 versions of that print in other museums. So that becomes a modeling problem sometimes for Wikidata. And then we also have some complex cases where, is an altarpiece a sculpture and a painting? Like it's kind of two things at the same time. So those are sometimes modeling issues that we have there.